you doing?
Hi, Sergey. I'm great. How are you?
Great, great. It's always a pleasure to see you. It's not the first time we're speaking, but it is always a pleasure to see you. Let's start with the nursing burnout. I would love to hear your perspective on what causes burnout, how it manifests in day-to-day nursing, and how organizations can be proactive, not necessarily reactive, doing something to protect their people. This is somewhat of a general topic, and if I want to drill down to like high resolution, in your opinion, what really causes burnout? It's just about workload, or it's deeper than that?
Oh, Sergey, I love this conversation. It's not a great conversation, but it's the one that we absolutely need to talk about. I studied burnout and I still study burnout. I did my dissertation, my doctoral research in nursing burnout. And so leadership from my research really emerged as a very dominant theme within the burnout infrastructure. And so what are the big root causes of burnout for nurses, for direct care nurses? So talking about that direct care nurse role, it's you said it. It's a reactive versus proactive leadership. It's a top-down decision making. It's really this disconnect, this dissonance between understanding what they want, what they need, and
Mhm.
what they're getting. And so I think there's this idea that they have what they need, we gave what they asked for, but was it in the right time? Like, are all the variables in alignment, right? And so for example, we talk about we have the correct number of staff, but the
Yeah.
number of staff without appreciation for complexity, it's really just halfway through to the problem, right? I think that a lot of times we are overly dependent on our high performers or on our hero nurses that are willing to pick up the shifts and jump in. And those are great relationships, right? So as a good leader, I have this great nurse and I have these great nurses who love me as a leader and they'll step up and they'll take those shifts. But what does that say for their long-term trajectory of their own well-being, of their own ability to continue to be resilient? What happens when I step away from that leadership role and someone else goes in that has a little bit of a different leadership style or dynamic? And so those are the things. It's very dynamic, it's very complicated, but I think at the root, it's system and system infrastructure is not matching what the nurses actually need on a day-to-day and sometimes hour-to-hour basis. Like we're just not agile enough in this space right now.
Yeah, it makes total sense. You just mentioned those hero nurses, and I totally remember myself being in those situations when I was one called, or I had to call somebody when I was doing the schedule, which I hated, by the way, but well, it is what it is. You realize that within a group, there are always people who are willing to pick up an extra shift. And what happens as a manager, you start going only to those people because you don't even want to call other people just not to be rejected.
Mhm.
And as willing as they are, they immediately feel like I'm working too much. People always come to me for help, and I'm helping, but hey, stop coming to me. And it's kind of this vicious cycle, it just doesn't end. You don't know how to break it. Totally understand. Is there a personal toll of burnout? How do you think nurses experience burnout physically, emotionally, and professionally?
It's funny that you asked this question this way because the next bend to my research is I've been looking at the nurses who share on TikTok and not just the ones who are posting the actual content, but I go through the comments and I look and there's just this deep resonance that I'm finding with particularly the younger generation that they'll take those shifts up.
Mhm.
They'll pick up the ones who don't have great boundaries or feel the pull or the need so much, but it looks like that shift that you're not working and you can't get out of it. You are sleeping for a lot of hours in the day. You are not prioritizing your own personal relationships with your family or your loved one. Your self-care starts to drop off. Just starting to have rising levels of irritability, more professional disconnect. It's the nurses that are starting to say, I don't know if I want to go back for that certification. Everything
Yeah.
becomes an additional burden, that feeling of joy, that feeling of even compassion starts to seep out. It's when they're getting there and they're like, oh my God, if that patient calls me one more time, and then they have a reflective moment later in the kitchen having a cup of cocoa and they're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
I don't think I was my best self today. I was a little bit snarky with that patient. And, it goes beyond from the administrative perspective. How does that represent on an HCAP score? That's your nurse at the bedside that's going home and feeling moral distress around this. They're feeling levels and layers of self-judgment, of blame.
Yeah.
And that's just on the interpersonal perspective. There are safety elements to nurses being tired and being fatigued. and doing medication administration or hanging up blood or doing all these elements that your critical thinking is on, but you're exhausted and you miss that data. You miss that data point. You miss that that patient started to, sort of shift in a different way. And that's exactly the nurse that goes backwards and goes, I think I kind of noticed it. They were telling me
Yeah.
that they weren't feeling great, but
Yep.
I thought they were just complaining and I was just not having a great day. And I've unfortunately, been on the holding of space end of those conversations, unfortunately. So I'm able to speak to those nurses, but it's just very hard. And I think another thing that I hear from them when they share is this frustration around why is it so hard? Why can't it be better? There's clearly, I'm able to do this and this and this so easily.
Yep.
Why can't this happen within my work infrastructure or spaces?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things here about the generation difference. And, we mentioned TikTok, so my mind kind of drifts to younger generation, to Generation Z, or however it's called. And then we're probably looking at a very big mind shift because, like, I remember the way I was taught in nursing school, in the university, whatever. Like, it always resembled somewhat of a boot camp where you're like, they teach you to comply because this is the way the system is built. And now there's a mind shift. People be like, I don't want to work that hard. What's up with that? I don't, I'm just not doing it. You know, and then it kind of starts growing into a problem where I mentioned it several times on different occasions, but 1 in 5 nurses leaving bedside nursing after the first year, which is like 20%. And it's a trend because 15, 20 years ago, it was around 13%. So it's a bad trend. But especially given the younger generation with different priorities, it's going to be even worse.
It's not going in a great direction. It's sort
No,
of like
no.
when you look at the number of registered nurses, but then you look at the number of registered nurses willing to stay in direct care roles within the acute care hospital setting, and it really just drops off significantly. And that 1 year retention rate and turnover, it's just really remarkable. And I love what you brought up. I think we were raised to sort of be martyrs and it's almost like you judged yourself on your ability to withstand the rigor. The tougher your preceptor was or the more abrasive, and it's just like, well, I had to do this back in the day, so you should be able to do it. I prided myself
Yes,
on
yes,
being able to meet that and exceed it, and
yes.
realize that I had to really shift the lens that I was looking through. And I mean, I think we're in that millennial tribe, ex-millennial. These are kind of looking at us like, stop this. You're
Stop
making it very
this. This is
terrible for
wrong.
us,
This is wrong.
perpetuating some degrees of, dare I say, toxicity. And, there's, this idea like, are they being dramatic? No, they're not being dramatic. They're being truthful. They're being vocal. They're being honest about what's working for them and what's not working for them. And I think, our ability to be agile or flexible within those spaces is going to make or break all of us, I think, within the industry.
Yeah. What about the organizational responsibility? We kind of,
Mhm.
outline the problems, and there are so many just tip of an iceberg. But let's try to switch to a positive side. Have you seen or do you know of any organizational policies that potentially support nurses, things that actually work?
So I struggle with this a little bit. I will say that I do see some organizations, they tend to kind of not be in the acute care hospital setting space. They're using, AI scheduling and that infrastructure to drive, one, attracting people to come and work for them and
Yep.
be able to service their clients in a very different way. I don't know that our acute care hospital settings, our large hospital systems have really shifted in that direction yet. And I do think that's going to be the next layer. Is it complicated? Yes, it's complicated. So I do know that within the United States alone, we have some hospital and health systems that are collective bargaining agreement
Mhm,
affiliated and
mhm,
others
mhm.
that are not. And again, it's a sticking point for me when we talk about ratios and numbers versus complexity and understanding what care needs are. And so I think that as we start to get better at those conversations as nurses, I think we're going to start to see a shift. Now, I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you when the shift was happening. What I will say, the shift needs to happen because until it does start to happen, the burnout is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
We look at when we talk about the organizational politics, nursing does not live on its own as a revenue generating center presently. in the infrastructure. And that creates a problem because when we talk about cost cutting and we're going to go and we need to save some money here in the budget, we're in trouble, we're not doing well. There is this instinct in some organizations to go, well, we're going to have to cut these FTEs. And that's
Mhm,
never
mhm,
usually
mhm.
the right idea. And I think now, with all the tools that we have, with the power of computing that we have,
Uh-huh.
there are different ways to look at it. There are different ways to really plug those variables in and look at what's your volume, what's your traffic, what are you looking at in terms of acuity, what are you looking at in terms of your staffing levels, numbers, years of experience, all of these other variables that really can set you up for a different day. There were days as a nurse that I had 5 patients and it was a nightmare, and days I had 8 patients and it was a cakewalk, right? It really, really depends on who I was working with, what resources were available. Just the tiniest things would drive you crazy. You have a drop off in your EVS team member, and that room's not getting turned over as quickly as you need it to. And now your whole day goes into a stagger. And so I think the better that we become at plugging these variables in and really looking at them in a metric based way, the better it is. But then what is that way? Is there a standard way to do that? And so I do find organizations that are innovative, that really have the voice of the nurse at the table, not
Mhm.
just there in a representative way, but actually driving decisions, not just informing policy, both, doing both, having strategic decision making capacity and power to go, well, I want to do this, and not fail fast, forward fast, fail forward fast. Let's pull in a pilot. Let's do a pilot really quick. Let's see how this is going. But even within that structure within nurses, and I'm going to say something real controversial
Okay, go ahead,
now.
please.
Sometimes as nurses, we get in our way a little bit, right? We are so adverse and risk averse that those pilots that should be, sort of quick and lower risk, we look at every single bad thing that could happen
Mhm.
as opposed to say, well, we're going to insulate the pilot in this way and get data out of it and then decide if it's something that we want to do and is it
Yeah.
scalable.
Actually, I think I'm seeing a somewhat positive trend because there's a lot of buzz recently, and the people, nursing influencers and nursing voices, such as yourself, for example, trying to promote those issues. And it's kind of visible, especially for those living in this space. And I think companies, big companies, small companies, whatever, do understand that if they want to develop a software, a piece of equipment, a tool, a machinery, whatever, for medical use that not necessarily only for nurses, but involves nurses, they probably need somebody sitting around the table making decisions with them. And I think there is a positive trend. Not enough yet, but we're moving in a good direction. About technology, which we are talking about right now, give me an example, maybe two examples of technology that already works for real and helps nurses in everyday work.
Let's see. I don't want to inject any biases here. Of any technology that allows us to get at data retrieval a lot
Mhm,
simpler.
mhm.
So any technology or technology company right now that's in this space that's allowing the nurse to use voice or just in a very quick keystrokes, 1 or 2 words to get at information they need, policies, procedures, um, big supporter of that. A lot of nursing time is spent looking for information,
Yes,
whether it's in the
yes,
chart
yes.
or it's external to the chart. It's a hospital policy, it's a protocol, it's something you need to find. How do I call in to get this cabinet fixed? Because that nurse role really has evolved. And then the other piece is, around scheduling, the ability to have, any type of intelligent scheduling,
Yeah.
right? So it doesn't replace the humans that are doing the work and doing that final cross check. But gone are the days. Like I just can't imagine living in the infrastructure anymore where I'm sitting down manually with multiple Excel spreadsheets, looking at this and then having to remember like, oh, right, does this person have a certification? Wait, no, that one does. I do need the skill set here on this day. And, who is able to go to the OR and who isn't. It's really, really remarkable that with what we have with computing at our fingertips, with the infrastructures of AI and I prefer to say augmented intelligence. And I think that the layers of that support the patient aspect too, patient education as
Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
is a big deal. So I think companies that are really trying to support healthcare organizations, small and large ones, in really getting the right staff to the right place at the right time is hugely helpful for all of us. And then the other piece with getting the right information to the nurse in real time.
And I think there's an advantage for early adopters because this area is moving very fast and the money and the resources are scarce. So probably the early adopters will benefit the most from that technology. It doesn't matter what technology right now, for the sake of this conversation. Any technology that can help should be adapted uh, fast.
I agree. It's a great conversation. We're learning a lot. I think one of the things that I love about being in this space, and within the startup space, is just the richness of conversation that we get to have with nurses, with care teams, because they're really not shy about saying, "This is what I need. This is
Mhm.
what's working. This isn't what's working. And is there a better way?" And I think there is something to be said for having so many healthcare tech startups in this space, looking at the problem through different lens and having the relationship where we share with each other and we're sharing information and we're sharing, oh, how do you think you would address this problem or how would you approach that? Because I think that's the only way we're gonna really get better. I think what I'm also sensing and what I've experienced myself within from the organizational perspective is sometimes we're locked into these like big box solutions that aren't really, it's not even so much about customization. They were really built with a very specific structure in mind. And I'm seeing a lot more diversity within our structures now. To your point, just with the influx and with the availability of telehealth and the way that we're delivering care, being able to have that discharge conversation happen without the doctor needing to necessarily come back and be physically at the bedside, it shifts the way that we're interfacing, even with our EHR or some of the other data and technology around us that were very workflow specific or contingent on a person showing up and pushing a button. So just, all of that reformatting, I just see a big, huge shift in the way that we look at clinical workflows and the way that we approach, even documentation. For a long time, we've been clicking through. And I think as ambient technology continues to expand and become more accessible and available, within the care spaces, we're going to see that the entire way that we charted is different. I mean, I started out on a Cardex, uh,
Yeah, same here.
paper.
Same here.
So I've already like lived through one shift. So to really be a part of, the revolution on this side,
Yeah.
it's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could have this conversation for much longer time, but you can't cover all the topics in the world, unfortunately. So thank you very much for this conversation. It's been great. Learned so much, and thank you for sharing your insight with us.
Thank you, Sergey. It was wonderful always talking to you. And yes, we could talk for hours, and we will
We
sometimes.
will.